Let's take a trip back in time to the second half of the 19th century, to a time when women were confined to the domestic sphere of home and family. This private sphere, or to be more overtly gendered about it, the women's sphere as it was often called, was purported to be the natural site and place for women, the one to which they were most essentially suited. Women acting or speaking in public were deemed unnatural, not to mention unseemly. Habermas traces the meanings of public and private back to the ancient roots of Western civilization. In feudal times, public came to demarcate that which was controlled by the state authority, versus the private, which was the domain of the citizens controlled by that authority. However, in order for nobles to exist as nobles, they required an audience in front of which and over whom to display their nobility. In this time period, the nobility were considered the public sector of society, with the rest of the population comprising the private. However, the relationships and definitions of these categories altered with the rise of capitalism, where the once private citizens began to form a public political entity that challenged the former authority of feudal rule by nobility. Economic and social changes brought about alterations in political structures and power, where the nature of the public, i.e. that which was state-related, began to shift away from the nobility and estate holders toward the larger class of citizens, which would comprise the bourgeoisie sphere of educated landowners. Economic production, once privatized and under the domain of the family as the primary producers of goods, expanded to include a larger conception of the public in the economic and subsequently the political realm. In this way, private people came together to form a public with the ability to critique and demand change in authority structures. This transformation was accomplished through changes in market economics, the uses of the press, and the changing nature of power with the rise of industrial capitalism. Habermas notes that the privatization of the family also occurred during this time and can be seen in the changing architectural styles, where the solitariness of individuals within a house came to be viewed as a sign of affluence, and rooms such as salons and parlors became popular as a place to receive outside visitors, but to keep them from infiltrating the private areas of the household. The divide between the realm of economic production and the home of the conjugal family led to the bourgeoisie conception of itself as divided between these two realms. For Habermas, by the definitions of public and private, the private sphere is still considered to comprise the market, whereas the sphere of the family is considered the intimate sphere. Habermas also notes that literature, writing, and communication reflect the importance of the private sphere of the family in the form of letters, the diary, and the domestic novel, all of which gained in popularity with a growing literate public in the 18th century. Book clubs, subscription libraries, and reading circles proliferated at this time as well. The economic changes that occurred with the rise of industrial capitalism moved the realm of production away from home-based businesses, in which women had often participated as skilled producers of goods, to one where work occurred outside the home and was set aside for men. Women, on the other hand, occupied what was commonly referred to as the domestic sphere, or, as it was commonly called, the women's sphere. In 18th and 19th century America, this was assumed to be the naturalized space appropriate for women. From this space, women, at least good women, should have no desire to speak out publicly or to contest the bounds of this private space. It was the sphere to which women were and should be naturally confined. Women in postbellum America, who came together in various clubs centered on literature, religion, and women's issues, were beginning to question their place in society and their power within it. For Iris, Mary, and Young, these women comprised a social group, and through these groupings they found ways to discuss their situations. Though they were brought up to believe that the home was their natural place in the world, as they came together they started to suspect that they might be oppressed. Young suggests that we should ask them some questions. Do you exercise your capacities to benefit others? Do you receive the benefits of your labor? Are you excluded from the labor force in useful participation in social life? Is power exercised over you? Do you take commands rather than give them? Are you denied authority in your daily life? Does the dominant society label your perspective invisible? Have you been marked as the other? Does society systematically mark members of your group for violence and abuse? We can examine the shift toward public inclusion for women in the latter half of the 19th century by noting the shift in educational opportunities for women, specifically in their access to composing and rhetorical skills. Though this access was often packaged within a context of the conservative values of Republican womanhood, in many cases women managed to repurpose these skills to further a more egalitarian agenda within the political realm, despite their initial lack of direct access. As Hauser notes, rhetoric has the potential to intervene within a democracy. Thus, as women gained rhetorical skills through literacy, education, and growing opportunities to practice these skills, they were able to consider their positions in society more critically, and importantly, to use their skills to sway or alter public opinion about the rights of women. Rather than looking for the public, Hauser urges us to examine multiple publics that come together to discuss issues of importance. Women in the 19th century came together through and around discourse, such as book clubs, women's clubs, and letter writing as a few examples. Women's clubs, which had diverse agendas and purposes, also provided an all-women space within which to discuss heretofore private issues and pave the way for greater organization in the women's suffrage movement and women's rights movement into the 20th century. Ben Habib's discussion of the various uses of privacy as pertaining to the sphere of moral or religious conscience, economic liberties, and the intimate sphere of home, family, sexuality, and reproduction is likewise useful when considering the place of women in late 19th century America. As she notes, men had different motivations and prerogatives for wanting to keep particular aspects of life private within the intimate sphere. However, this intimate sphere is where women at the time were confined, and thus issues of violence or abuse that occurred within this sphere were not able to be addressed publicly. Women came together around this issue to address things such as drunkenness and alcohol abuse that plagued so many private households, which led to actions such as the temperance movement in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Coming together around these issues, women attempted to use their rhetorical skills to illuminate the injustices of the private sphere of the home in order to enact change within public opinion and eventually policy. For Fraser, women coming together under the conditions of 19th century patriarchy is an example of one of the host of competing counterpublics of the time, where the relations between bourgeoisie publics and other publics was always conflictual. Though many of the women of the time would not have considered their convening to be overtly conflict-based with the overall hegemonic discourse, for Fraser they would represent a convergence of a subaltern counterpublic. While women, at least at first, attempted to remain true to their domestic sphere identities, the more women met and became a counterpublic, the more they questioned and rebelled against these confines. For Warner, women at this time would comprise a counterpublic, as a group aware of its subordinate status, whether consciously or not. Women came together around discourse, letters, books, speeches, pamphlets, ideas, and used these tools to form a counterpublic that, at least eventually, was able to enact change within the larger society. This is a useful theoretical lens from which to view the widely distributed network of women gaining literacy and rhetorical skills in the late 19th century who formed this alternate public, which eventually became a recognizable social movement that included issues such as women's suffrage, temperance, and other legal political action taken in order to promote women's safety and rights. These theories of the public sphere offer ways to understand the movement of women from being confined wholly within the private domestic sphere to finding a place within the public from which to speak. Education, literacy, composition, and rhetorical means were appropriated by women in ways not intended by the dominant ideology of their time, which allowed access to these skills for, supposedly, the sole purpose of making them better wives and mothers and to uphold the ideals of postbellum America. However, as women came together in alternative or counterpublics, they found ways of using these skills to make their voices heard, to sway public opinion, and to more fully enter spheres within the public previously only accessible to men.